Welcome to Seeing Through Ancient Eyes, where I share unexpected insights about Torah, diving deep into the ancient Near East culture to uncover how much better our God is compared to any other power that any of us might ever want to put our hope and our trust in. I'm Gail Heaton, and if this is your first time here, let me say welcome. So each week I present one bite-sized piece of ancient Near East culture taken from the week's Torah portion. I do this so that you can get a better understanding of the culture in which the Torah was lived and given. Because if you know culturally speaking, what the ancients were up against, I think that you can get a better sense of how God met them where they needed him to. And when you can see what he's done for the ancients, I think that you will trust him even more in your own life to meet your own needs too. At least that's my hope. So this week we are in Haftarah Lecha, which means get up and go. So, okay, for this lesson I've got one single verse from the whole Torah portion, chapter 15:6. And then from that, I'm going to pick out just one word in particular. Genesis 15:6 says, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So the one little word I'm going to pick out is the word believed, right? And I want to focus on that because there's something very extraordinary about Abram believing the Lord. And most of us miss that because we don't see through ancient eyes. Okay. Now, Abram's, his original name, Abram, that means exalted father in Hebrew. And then God gave him the name Abraham, father of a multitude. The Hebrew letter He was added to make that change. And the Hebrew letter He was also added to Sarai to make the name Sarah. And we can see this in Genesis 17, 5, 6, and 15 through 17. So this Hebrew letter, in some sense, can mean like the outbreathing of the Spirit of God. And the sound of the letter He is the sound made by breathing out. And we know that God breathed into humankind, Genesis 2:7, right? Then the Lord formed Adam from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and Adam became a living being. So the addition of the He, God's breath, reaffirms Abraham and Sarah, moving from barrenness to co-creators of life. That's just a little side note, right? So before we talk about what Abram believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. I want you to have a little bit of a cultural perspective on God's call to Abram in a general sense, okay? Because this will give you some background for this idea of what was it that God believed the Lord, okay? So Genesis 12, 1 and 2, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. So the name of the Torah portion is taken from this first line, Lech Lecha, get up and go, right? And that's the call of Abraham, or of Abram, I guess at this point, right? So let's look at the cultural underpinnings here. Now, to really understand what God is asking of Abram, we have to understand something about the A&E. There were certain influences that controlled one's worldview, like how they viewed their own identity, how they related to their family, and how they understood and related to society around them, okay? So the three most important things in the A&E, what gods did you serve? What land were you tied to? Like what land is rooted in your history? What land has been sustaining your family? Okay. And the third is your family itself. The family itself was the single biggest influencer in an ancient person's identity, even more so than what we think about today. So how you were tied to your family, what was your place within the family, that determined your identity. Now, Abram was in Haran when he was called out. Okay. So this area of Mesopotamia is a region along the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. So whenever you hear about any major rivers like this, the Tigris, Euphrates, the Nile, understand that this was a very fertile area. Okay. These rivers would flood annually, and the resulting the result would be just tremendous fertile land, and great, like, the cultural centers would be built up around here. Okay. So had Abram stayed where he was in a very great position with all the natural resources that he could ever want. He was in a great position there to become a powerful and dominant people group. All right. But he's told to go to Canaan. Now, Canaan is in an area of land that is not known for the kind of abundance and fertility and big city living of Abram's current region. Okay? So he's not being called, go from this abundant area to another abundant area. God's asking Abram to leave this land and to leave everything that shapes his identity and holds his identity intact. To leave all of this and go to a land that Abram doesn't know about. A land that he has no ancestral ties to. There's no family there. No real abundance of the land itself, right? To move away from his family's territorial gods to serve one God that is not one of his family gods. Now, imagine the original audience hearing this. What would they have thought about this? You know, we think, wow, that he's brave. The ancients would have thought, this is a devastating ask. This is a huge ask, right? So, okay, the word that we have that we're going to look at today is believed. In Hebrew, it's aman. And we're going to see what the ancients thought about this word. Abraham believed the Lord. Okay. And this is something I want to train you to do, to ask, what would the ancients have thought about this? Here's some things to keep in mind. The biblical writers took for granted that their audiences shared their language and culture. And that's why the Bible doesn't really cover explanatory language on key terms and ideas. It's just assumed that the audience would share the culture, but, we don't. So we need to train ourselves to ask, what would the author or the audience have believed about this? And the good news is that today we have more knowledge than even those just like 20 years ago had about the ancient Near East. So let's get back to our question. What did the ancients understand about the word that we translate believe? To get at the culture behind this word, I'm going to take you on a very rudimentary survey of one type of ancient covenant. Okay. Now, covenants aren't something that you probably have been exposed to before. And the reason that we're going to explore covenants in this lesson is that the ancients understood their relationship to God as being covenantal. All right. And our text in Genesis 15:16 that we're working with contains covenant language. In fact, much of the language of the Bible is covenant language, with covenants meaning something particular to the ancients that we often don't know about. So I believe that the more that you understand about A&E covenants, the more you'll be able to see its language use throughout the Bible. And this can actually inform your own walk with our covenantal God. Okay. So the word aman, believed, it means to confirm or support. And it itself relates to covenants. Aman is the root of our word, amen. So to believe or to amon God means to affirm or support the covenant with him, to be loyal, right? I believe you. Now, to the ancients, I believe you. That doesn't mean, well, I think you're telling the truth. Okay, so if it didn't mean that, well, what did it mean? I think that when we can understand what Abraham believed, that this is going to be able to help us center our loyalty toward God in ways that please God and in ways that allow us to stay connected to our purpose, right? This purposeful God of ours. So we're going to unpack what it means that Abraham believed, but we're going to do it with this quick foray into ancient Near East covenants, okay? Specifically one, the type between a greater king and a lesser king, all right? There's a number of different A&E covenants, but we're going to focus on the one between a suzerain and a vassal, right? A suzerain is the supreme king, that's God. A vassal is the lesser king, that's us. Now, almost everything that I know about ancient covenants, I first learned from Rico Cortez of Wisdom and Torah Ministries. And it's from several of his studies that he has online that I have, through the years, drawn from this lesson. His studies on covenants in ancient Near East, they're deep and they're wide. And like with any of the other scholars that I bring to you, I'm only scratching the surface, right? Okay. So this kind of relationship that the ancients understood between them and God is that they're vassals, he's the suzerain, right? That's how they related to him as king. So a suzerain was the greater king and the vassal was lesser kings that came under the headship of the supreme, right? Now, you and I, especially those of us in the United States, we don't have really any concept of a king. And if we do, it's probably not so favorable. And we definitely don't view kings the way that the ancients did. King and kingdom, those are themes that are huge in the ancient Near East, and they're themes that are repeated throughout the Bible. I would highly recommend Dr. Dina Dye of Foundation in Torah Ministries as somebody that you can learn more about king and kingdom. She's one of my absolute favorite go-to experts on kings and kingdom. So there's three initial ideas about this type of covenant between the greater and the lesser king that I want to share. There's more to the subject, but there's three I think that's going to help us as we investigate what it means to amon God and what it means for you, for Abram too, and what it means for you and I too. Okay. So the first thing, in the ancient Near East, this kind of covenant wasn't short term. It was long lasting. Okay. Each party to the covenant had responsibilities that they had to carry out. And the point is that these responsibilities were clearly defined. Okay. In some cases, they were standard duties. In other cases, they would be more individual. But the point is that there was no ambiguity in the description of the responsibilities, right? There was no excuse to plead ignorance. Well, I didn't know it was there. Okay. And then the third thing, for a vassal to only confess allegiance to a suzerain verbally, but not carry through with their actions, that was akin to treason. And that was punishable by death. Okay? Serious times. So to enter into this kind of ancient covenant, the lesser king made a declaration of vassalship to the supreme king. And this was a verbal confession. And that verbal confession allowed them to enter into the relationship. But again, active loyalty was assumed. So it was incumbent upon the vassal to follow through with their oath, because the oath was binding. So this is really a case of actions speak louder than words, right? And one aspect of the loyalty was that the vassal would fight alongside this suzerain king whenever the suzerain was going out to conquer or to defend their territory. Okay, so whenever the vassal was called on, they would have to drop everything and attend to that. In turn, the suzerain, the great king, would protect the vassal from anyone who was harming him. Now, in Genesis 14 of this Torah portion, we actually get to see a list of these vassal kings. It's really interesting. But what's going on there is that these vassal kings are revolting and uprising against the suzerain in an act of treason. And this is the context for the narrative of the kidnapping of Lot and Abram's rescue of him. So here's a side note. What Abraham does for Lot in this Torah portion is basically answer Cain's question that he had from Bereshit, am I my brother's keeper? Because unlike Cain, Abram responds with a yes, I am my brother's keeper, in this case my nephew, and he sets out on that rescue mission. So this is the setting, right, that we have in which Abram gets a chance to demonstrate, and not just say with words, that he's loyal to his Lord and his King. When Abram believed the Lord, this means that he made a declaration or a verbal confession of faith, a pledge of loyalty to God and to God alone. Okay. Have you ever wondered what that phrase in James 2 meant, calling Abraham a friend of God? So James 2, 21 through 23. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. Okay? So take a look at this chart of common legal terms in this covenant agreement. Notice the term friend down there at the bottom. Faithful loyalty to the suzerain. So we have a father, that's what the vassals called their suzerain. A son is what the greater king calls his vassals. Adoption is this relationship. When a vassal king submits to the suzerain, then the vassal king's people also become adopted by that suzerain. Brother is... that's a different kind of a covenant. It's a parity covenant. That's made between two vassals. Love is a term of loyalty to the suzerain. To know is a term used by the king who sees the faithfulness of the vassal. And then again, friend, faithful, loyal to the suzerain. So friend was this term meaning faithful and loyal to the suzerain. And Abram demonstrated loyalty to God, his suzerain, right? So, I mean, to me, James 2 makes a lot more sense now. And I think it preserves the honor that's due our great king. He's not our buddy, right? But he does extend this invitation of intimacy with him through his protective and his exclusive relationship. And that's important to point out, exclusive relationship, because our God is not like the gods of the ancient Near East. The ones who are described as distant and uncaring. In the A&E, no other God ever entered into the kind of loyalty covenant like our God made with his people and makes with his people. In fact, and we'll explore this in more detail in some of the later lessons, but the gods didn't care if you were exclusive to them or not. As long as you met their needs, you could dally with other gods all you wanted. So, again, covenants meant loyalty to one another. The gods of the ancient Near East didn't make covenants with people. They didn't expect loyalty. They just expected, take care of my needs today. So in the last part of Genesis chapter 14, you can see an example of a loyalty test that Abram experienced. If you've ever wondered why he rejected the gifts of the king of Sodom, you can understand this better when you look through ancient eyes. So kingly gifts, they had a specific purpose in the A&E. And to accept a king's gift bound the recipient to the king. So in Abram's case, to accept the gifts from the king of Sodom, that would have been a transgression. It would have been treason of his covenant with the Lord, according to ancient Near East covenants of this sort. So Abram pledged, or Aman, his covenant with God, or repledged it, I guess you could say, by refusing any gift from any other king. He affirmed that he belongs to the Lord and no one else, like you would a king, not like you would a god, right? His king is his God is his king. Now, also, I think worthy to mention is the phrase that Abram uses in Genesis 14:22. He says, "The Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth." And that specific A&E language, which signified the highest allegiance and honor to the highest suzerain king. So Abram's loyalty to God is extraordinary, right? He walked by faith and he turned down the riches of another king, a king who was very visible to Abram, right? In contrast to the unseen God who he chose to remain faithful to and loyal to. So it was after this that the word of the Lord came to Abram in the vision, and he says, "Do not be afraid. I am your shield and your great reward." Right? Genesis 15:1. It's not a bad trade-off. So the take-home message here, I think, is that when our actions of loyalty match our verbal profession, we're blessed with protection and blessings from our King. So I want you to be on lookout for these opportunities to show your loyalty to God, these tests in your life, right? And this vassal covenant relationship is actually what's in mind in Romans 10. Romans 10, 9 through 10 says, "If you declare with your mouth Yeshua is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. For it's with your heart that you believed and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved." So heart in the ancient Near East, lev in Hebrew, that wasn't the blood pumping organ that we know heart to be. And it didn't just mean where we feel emotions. It actually, to the ancients, was the seat of the mind and the will. So, we know today, we know more about the brain, and we know that the brain is like the seat of the mind and the will. But to the ancients, the heart housed not only emotions, but also volition, which is the power of one's will, and cognition, thinking. So what makes you you resides in the heart. So whenever we read something about heart, it would do us well to think about how we view mind, right? Behaviors spring from the heart. So to believe with your heart means to be action-oriented. And when it comes to loyalty to your king, it isn't what you think or even what you say, it's what you do, right? So it's our behaviors that demonstrate that we are loyal to God, no matter who or what tries to entice us to loyalty to them, like Sodom's king bearing gifts tried with Abraham. And there's, we talked about in the last lesson, the gods of the world, where there's many kings in the world today, right? Just as there were in ancient times, trying to give us gifts. Now remember, in the ancient Near East, to accept a king's gift bound that recipient to the king. So a question to ask is, what gifts are you receiving someplace else that turns your loyalty away from God? That's the key. Not that you can't receive a gift from someplace else, but does it turn your loyalty away from God? And I think that this Torah portion can remind us that walking with God, that means demonstrating with actions that we give him our ultimate loyalty. So some things that you can ask, where can I show aman or covenant faithfulness to my Lord? How do I need to reprioritize my loyalties in order to put him first? And then who are the kings in my life that promise wealth and security that if I accept their gifts, I turn away from God? How many of their gifts have I inadvertently been enjoying? And what is it that they're asking in return? Right? So I don't have your answers and you don't have mine. I'm still trying to work these questions out for myself. But it wasn't until I uncovered the ancient world of suzerain vassal covenants that I really took my responsibility of absolute loyalty to God as seriously as I now try to. Now, I still fail, and my king and my God is there to actually support me to be loyal. And we can always ask him for help that way. So I think that knowing about these ancient covenants even just a little bit, and there's so much more to learn about them, I think it can help us become more bold to take greater risks with God. And I know this for myself. My faith increases when I ask him to supply my needs instead of relying on someone or something else to. Right? Now, he might use an organization or a government or a person to meet our needs, but it's start out asking from his hand first. Right? So the world, kings, they may offer us gifts, but we, like Abraham, can say, no, thank you. I'm going to stick with my God, even though he's unseen. I trust him and his promises in my life. And I think that when you and I, anytime that we start with God for our needs, he's going to give to us however he sees fit. But we could acknowledge that it comes from him, right? And that's loyalty. So, as we think about this lesson, as we stretch our faith a little bit in this area, may you and I experience the Most High God, our shield and our exceedingly great reward as we walk in Aman like Abram did. And I'll see you next week in the next Torah portion.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.